deal.
Yeah.
And with that, it is 6:30. I am hitting record and we are already live streaming, Madam Chair.
And thank you so much. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people. Great. I really appreciate everyone joining us in the middle of the summer for this meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the City of Yes zoning for carbon neutrality so that we can meet again on September 7th in a public hearing and then take the consensus of the recommendations that we come about here and any additional information from the public hearing and bring that to the full board on September 11th. A reminder that open meeting law, we will not be coming to a vote here. We will be coming to consensus. And so with that, I just want to remind everyone what the protocol is as well. So again, thanks for being here. I hope everyone was able to look over the documents that was sent out early in the summer with your small but not so small homework assignment. And we'll go ahead and get started. And I just want to acknowledge before we start here tonight that we are missing a very valuable board member, Mr. Dwayne Joseph, who passed away suddenly on August 7th, and his coming home was this past weekend on August 19th. His sage responses, opinions, and advice will be missed here tonight. What I'd like to do is that on September 11th, between the public hearing and our general meeting, that if board members have words that they'd like to say, we'll still be live streaming. And so we'll use, which I think will be a fairly significant amount of time between the public hearing and the general meeting to say a few words about him so that we're using our time very efficiently. Yes. All right. So moving forward to the task at hand. We are discussing the City of Yes zoning for carbon neutrality, which is a zoning text amendment. We are meeting here in the summer because we would like to submit our responses to city planning before they come to a final vote. So to start here, I've made a bunch of notes. I want to remind everyone that we did send a letter that was submitted to the ZAP portal as a placeholder and some preliminary comments. That letter was dated July 3rd, 2023. In this letter, we offered a provisional and conditional recommendation to approve. Those provisional conditional recommendations will be what we are discussing here tonight. In addition, we made several points in this letter that I just want to remind everyone about. In paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in paragraph 5, we stated there is very little acknowledgement that other agencies such as DOT, DEP, DOB, and DOF will have to play a role, and that there will be various long and short-term economic implications for the city, its merchants, and residents alike. There's also no mention of how this proposed zoning change interacts with other recently passed zoning text amendments, nor does it acknowledge the Brooklyn Borough President's comprehensive plan. And then moving on to the next paragraph, this is in regards to our FCNY planning fellow Morgan Ruther. Namely, proposal 15 should add flexibility to the street tree requirements to allow connected tree beds, as well as substitution of one required street tree with a DEP compliant rain garden. We urge DCP to revise the language to make it clear that permeable paving is always permitted, and impervious surfaces in CB14 can create opportunities to integrate green infrastructure for stormwater management and combat urban heat island effects. So with that reminder of the letter that we sent to DCP on July 3rd, I am happy to open the floor. Please put your hand up in the chat to anyone who has reviewed the material sent at the beginning of the summer, and if you would like to make a recommendation for us to consider as part of our overarching conditions that we will send forward. I see board member Carl Henry Cesar has his hand up. Go ahead.
Hey. So folks, good evening. Chairwoman Brown, thank you. And yes, completely agree with you about, to be frank, it sucks that we lost Dwayne, and I don't like speaking about him in the past tense, and definitely offer my support of using the time between the public hearing on September 7th to share those words. In terms of this meeting, yeah, I read the letter that was submitted on July 3rd. I agree with it. The question I have for the group is the part in, so yes, the question I have is the 5th paragraph in the letter that was sent. It starts with, therefore, the conditions related to this approval or that DCP will satisfactorily address concerns related to the 17 proposals. What I'm wondering is, how does the board feel if we either had a table or a bullet list that just highlighted a summary of the things that we feel for the 17, because the planning fellow addressed, I believe, number 1 for the solar panels and also 14 and 15, right? There's 17 proposals. So I'm just wondering, how does the board feel about, as we continue to look at these documents between now and the public hearing, any additional things that we think could be worth spelling out a little bit more? Do we feel like maybe a bulleted list or maybe a table as an addendum to this letter could be beneficial to submit to the city? That's my comment.
Sure. We definitely can organize our final response as it pertains to their outline with regards to the 17 proposals. Yeah, I think that would be an organized way in which we can go ahead and present that to the CPC. Does anyone have any concerns as they look through the information? I don't know if you want me to read some of mine to sort of, get the conversation going. Carl, I'll let you go before Barton, just because is this a follow-up to what you were speaking about earlier?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And so an example is, excuse me, I was looking at the zoning text amendment, and there's a section starting on page 52. And it's talking about restrictions on operation of accessory off-street parking spaces. And it lists like the residential district numbers, and there's a lot that I don't know, but this is precisely why we're having this conversation, right? Because there's a specific section that is on page 53, and it's 25-412, and it says section B, and it says in R3-2 through R10 districts, other than R4-1, R4A, R4B, and R5A districts, up to 5 spaces or 20% of all # accessory # off-street parking spaces, whichever is greater, may be allocated to publicly available electric vehicle charging facilities or # car sharing vehicles #, right? So this is the kind of stuff where I don't know what the residential breakdown is within CB14, but we know that parking is something that's been a pain point for residents in multiple sides, for those who do have vehicles and for those who don't, right? So this is the kind of thing, I think this point is a perfect embodiment of why we're having this conversation now, just because we know there's a lot more impacts and the city didn't give us enough time to accurately go through them. And so this is the kind of thing where I feel like in a bulleted list or whatever we agree to, these are some of the devil in the details, for lack of a better word, that, we need to call out, because we can't just say yes blanketly, because we know there's so much in here. And I think this is a perfect example of that, where I don't know enough about the residential zoning, even though I should, but that definitely sounds like something to consider, where the city's proposing some percentage of slots within a residential area could be allocated for either, car sharing vehicles or electric vehicle charging facilities.
All right, so in section 25-431, limited repairs or motor fuel sales permitted in specified districts. So in the comment section, they didn't, this zoning text already exists, and all they did was remove the tail of it where it just specified motor fuel. And their comment was limiting obsolete allowances for accessory motor fuel pumps in accessory parking facilities. So 25-43, 431 wasn't modified any other way. It already existed, so it wasn't added. And all they did was sort of clarify this idea about motor fuel pumps. But to your point, there is text that was added or changed regarding the percentages of residential parking spaces in buildings. I made some notes about those. And I certainly want to tap into board member Gregory Alvarez and Shalisha Stainville if they have any comment towards what Carl Henry Cesar is bringing up.
Yeah, no, I can jump in if you want as to that specific point. The way I read that section was it's sort of part of their overall attempt to encourage through zoning their the ability to allow for EV charging stations within off-street parking. So I think, as to your point, Carl, that the as to the question of what the implications are. I mean, there are a number of implications that I think could be applied to it. For instance, in a way, it's not requiring these spaces to be added. It says that they may be added, so it gives the opportunity to add them as public spaces rather than as necessarily a requirement. I think it gives the option of future developers to add those sorts of spaces in a way that might be helpful to the community. I'm not exactly sure what the how that would actually work in practice necessarily, but I think what they're trying to say is that we can't necessarily legislate these sorts of things on the street. So we're trying to provide options for these sorts of spaces in private parking areas. So in the end, what's the implication of that? I don't know. Would developers actually provide those spaces? I don't know. But it's certainly a question where I'm at least in my mind, I'm not exactly sure how that would necessarily play out in practice. But overall, I think what they're trying to do with parking is just to encourage that sort of thing. Like, they've added provisions for automated parking areas as well. It's to me, it's almost as if overarchingly they're trying to account for cars and vehicles, and this is the way they're trying to do it. But I don't know, Joanne, if you had another thought, overall on some of the parking provisions. But that was just sort of my take. It's almost kind of strange that they're emphasizing the need for spaces, but on the other hand, they're just recognizing, well, people are still going to drive their cars, and if anything, we want them to be electric.
Right. So when I reviewed the 163-page document, what I noticed is that they kept the provisions of how much parking could be available in off premises or part of a residential building, but they also preserved the right for residents to claim those spaces, even if they are being used by the community or renting for above a week or monthly basis. And it said in the provision that all the resident of the building would have to do would be to give the landlord 30 days notice in order to claim that space. So not much change. It's just that they moved things around in a way, and removed some of the language to Greg's point that to make it specific or allow allow charging stations for electric vehicles to make it more accessible.
Got you. Thank you both. I appreciate that.
Joanne, I think you're
You're
muted.
muted.
Huh? Oh, sorry. Sean, you had your hand up?
Just to clarify on that, to record it, if we're going to capture the comments tonight, I'm trying to frame just even the short discussion, and do we leave it as a question? Is it a question about whether DCP examined potential impacts or where there are allowances? Because there's a lot of language about allowances in the proposed text amendment. Has there been a probability or an economic impact study? You know, what does DCP anticipate with these allowances, or how are we going to frame where we're just sort of unclear about what they're trying to get at or what the impact will be in the community?
Well, my takeaway from the question and conversation was that preferential parking for residents should be upheld. Is that correct, Carl?
Oh, I had no stance on the parking. I was using that specific point within the zoning text amendment to highlight my advocacy for whether we do a bullets or table, something just calling out each of the pieces for the 17 proposals that we haven't already identified from our July 3rd email. And then to Sean's point, yeah, maybe we got to figure out if we're going to do it, if we wanted to do a probability or ask them for an economic impact. But I don't have a stance for that. I was just using that example as just more reason why this meeting is important, because the city was asking us to approve something way too complex too quickly.
So I like the idea of posing it as a question. Unless there is a consensus about this concept that, you know, parking in residential areas should be not reserved, but, you know, be preferentially for residents of the building or residents of the community, so on and so forth. But I don't want to, you know, get so in the weeds, but to say, is this really a question similar to what Sean had put out there? Well, I'm sure parking and things of this nature will come up again. So let's see where we go with this conversation and circle back on it. So Barton, you're up next.
Can you hear me okay? I guess I'm going to go as far out of the weeds as I can. And so I went to see what I thought all of the other community boards in Brooklyn had said and what the borough president's office had posted. And did I see that only we and CB10 were the only two that actually put in any wording and everybody else just took a vote?
No, I think their comments, I mean, there was an email that had the comments that was sent out from quite a few boards, including some in Manhattan. But even I had trouble finding the actual resolutions that were posted to the ZAP portal because I could not log in. They're having an issue logging in, and I think you have to log in to actually see those documents.
Understood. CB10 had this voluminous document that, you know, I took forever to read, and all seemed very well focused and you know, Greg and Talisha probably know this better, on much more, you know, specific zoning issues about perimeters of houses and heights, et cetera. So they seem to be focusing more on details. But I guess in the opposite direction, I'm going to go back and invoke Dwayne, as I am more than pleased to do. And I went back to our, you know, public hearing, and he said, I think, as sort of echoing Carl, that the devil is in the details, and that what city planning has done has allowed options, and it will be the implementation under which we will either thrive or suffer. So I'm wondering if, you know, he had said in that meeting that maybe there should be an interagency task force to oversee implementation of the changes that have been made via City of Yes. And I'm just wondering if there's some way that we could get some agency like DCP to help inform us when, oh, by the way, there's going to be something placed in your neighborhood. There's going to be some approval given that pertains to the changes from City of Yes. And in that way, we can then ask the agency or whomever to come and then give us a more specific presentation so that we can evaluate on a case-by-case basis what the effect to our neighborhood will be. I'd be thrilled to think it can
I don't know
happen.
what's going on with this one student because y'all not paying attention to this.
Deborah, please mute.
So that would be my wish, but whether or not we could get it is probably slim, but it at least gives us some input into how all of these changes will affect us.
I don't disagree. You know, when you said that, I recall that a lot of times when there is a project, usually, I mean, think about the order of operations, right? Zoning text amendment, if adopted, will then inform the Department of Buildings and what local laws they implement, and then it will inform how developers will proceed. So then if we have a development that is not as of right, but a lot of the zoning text amendment makes things as of right, we may see less. May see less presentations or the need for our weigh-in on these because of the brush in which the zoning text amendment allows things to be done without community input.
Which is exactly what I'm trying to counterbalance, which is the fact that so much more would be allowed because of the options that people are being given. But I still would hope that somehow we can then be informed, and then we can make at least requests, you know, that, hey, you know, you weren't able to do this before, like a year ago, and now you're able to do it. And we just want you to come here and sit and listen to our concerns, and we want to hear you explain how you think this is good for our neighborhood.
Right, but something that is as of right, they have no.
No, I totally agree.
But
I'm just saying, as a courtesy to us, they would do that.
Right, but the thing that we should focus on here is to look at the items that we feel are problematic as of right.
Okay.
So, you know,
Understood.
if you feel that battery storage on roofs shouldn't be as of right, then that should be the comment in our response.
Right. No, I understand. I read that most of the boards, as well as the borough president, all expressed concerns about the battery storage on roofs.
Right. If you feel that, you know, mini split systems, the condensers of mini split systems that can reach a height of 35 feet or 30% of the building's height as of right in this zoning text amendment is problematic, then that's something that we should come to consensus to.
Understood. I know the EV charging stations seem to have been a big issue with other boards and the borough president, et cetera, but a lot of that is not my field of expertise, so I'll defer to others. Thank you.
Sure. Next person is Liz Denise.
Hello. I just wanted to, before I kind of make my statement, grounded in a little bit of data. I wanted to note that I've heard about how having to come before ULURP and so forth increases costs that then to the developer, which then in turn increases costs to people's rent. And we're in the middle of a housing crisis right now where our rents are skyrocketing and we've been losing especially like deeply affordable housing within CB14 and across the city. And I also wanted to note that in our district, 50% of or 56% of people do not own a car, and only 19% of people drive to work. So just kind of giving some clarity about why I'm going to talk about parking in the way I am is because it's not something that serves the majority of our residents very effectively right now. And so one of the I understand that there are limitations to a text amendment, and I understand that there are future things coming down the pipeline, such as considering removing parking minimums in later City of Yes things, specifically housing opportunity. But one of the things that really jumped out to me was the ability to add solar panels over surface parking lots. Surface parking lots right now are, I think obviously if you compare a surface parking lot without solar panels to a surface parking lot with solar panels, there is a big gain from getting to store and capture that solar energy that helps with, being helps with our carbon neutrality and so forth. And if that's the world we're looking at, I'm in favor of it. That said, when we're talking about it in the reality of the city where, surface parking lots are one of the best opportunities to develop into more housing to help allow for lower, to have more housing, more abundant, would help to lower rents and just provide deeply affordable housing if it's done with MIH or so forth. That's not exactly the exact trade-off. I know that we can't really change the text amendment isn't going to say, hey, here's a surface parking lot zoning right now. It's some commercial zoning. All of a sudden you can do something else with it. But by allowing people to invest more money in it and get, potentially make more money off of providing that solar energy and getting some value from that, as well as the parking money, the money from people spending, renting parking spaces, it would limit the possibility of using that land to better serve more New Yorkers and better serve kind of, the large percentage of people, say in our district, who don't own cars and don't get around with cars. So I don't know if there's something we can add as commentary suggesting that we hope that they consider this holistically or, look into whether or not service parking lots down the line should be something that continue to be a specific zoning that can preclude other uses, because in my opinion, looking at the data, it's, there's, whether or not there's parking, like there could be housing with that parking, there could be a thriving commercial center with that parking or so forth, or medical offices. So I don't know if there's a way we can incorporate that feedback into our information.
Sure. Sorry, not to interrupt you. I just want to strike with an Alice Hot. I think that's a really interesting concept that incentivizing a solar farm on a surface parking lot could de-incentivize housing construction, taking away the idea that they would have to go through the ULURP process perhaps anyway, which is very expensive. But I think that is an interesting comment that I haven't seen. Does anyone disagree with that could be a concern, that perhaps there's the unintended consequences of incentivizing surface parking lots? Can we put that in as a concern? Do I have a consensus?
I'm just kind of, can I speak?
Yeah, on this matter.
Oh, I'm just trying to clarify what exactly were you meaning, Liz? Like, are you saying that there shouldn't be an increase in parking lots, or just that the data that you found says that people aren't really driving, so don't put more, or like?
Well, so it's saying that like right now, if you have a parking lot, like right now in a lot of zoning, you can only have a parking lot in that space. And this text amendment would allow you to have a parking lot that also has solar panels on it, which would provide more income for the person who owns the parking lot and would also cost money to do. So that would potentially limit their budget and ability to then, instead of having it be a surface parking lot now with solar panels, making it say a housing or retail or something else that also may or may not have parking, that also may or may not have solar panels. And just only having land, like land is so scarce in New York City because we're a very small city with a lot of people in it, like physically land wise. So just having it only, using any service, something only for parking is, there's just so many more opportunities of what could be done with that land that wouldn't even necessarily take away parking. It just, the worry is that by making solar, by adding solar, allowing people to add solar panels to parking lots, they might not be incentivized to do other things like building housing, which again may or may not have parking, may or may not have solar panels, instead, to alleviate some of the other pressures that our zoning code puts on things. I don't know if that helped.
Well, no, it kind of brought up more questions. I'm not sure I would even vote for consensus. I mean, not for me. I would sit out if I have to vote on something, but I mean, what about the data of the people who aren't necessarily captured in that data, or the people who own multiple cars?
Well, I think it's not about parking per se, but about land use. And so if the parking lot owner can cover the parking lot with with solar panels that are 15 feet high and generate energy and sell that back to the energy supplier, they're making the income from the parking and they're making the income from the solar, right? Which reduces their incentive to develop the property into housing, commercial property, so on and so forth. And I think that's an interesting concept. You see what I'm saying? And in a housing crisis, if you're incentivizing houses for cars and not houses for people, by allowing people to generate income on this land, which this land is basically no maintenance, it's just a lot, right? And a security guard. So that's where we're driving at here. Does that make it a little bit more clear?
It does. It does. It's just that now then I'm thinking, but the housing isn't really affordable anyway. So what's wrong with the parking lot that has the solar panels on top? At least it's something to do something.
Well, we don't have to take a firm stance on it. We can bring it up as a point, right? We can bring it up as a point that valuable land is being used to farm energy and house cars instead of, because we can put solar panels on roofs, right? So, and this makes the way for putting solar panels on roofs as of right. Instead of using the entire lot with no housing on it, you can still put solar panels on top of the building. But we're spending a lot of time on one concept. And Greg, I saw your hand up, so I'm assuming that you had something that you wanted to add. So please do, because this is, your wheelhouse.
Well, yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add would be, it definitely is an interesting point, Elizabeth. But you also raised the point about, how later in the process they're going to probably reduce the amount of parking that's going to be required generally for housing. And so, it'll be interesting to see whether or not, but on the other hand, they're also incentivizing creating automated parking lots in more parts of the city as well. So it's I think it's all going to work hand in hand. But I definitely see your point, and I think it is worth making. In terms of will that be will that be incentivized, or is it intended with all of the other zoning changes? Will parking be de-incentivized as a as a standalone land use, and more housing will be encouraged because it will be easier to build housing because you won't need as much parking? So I don't know. I mean, it's I think there's a lot to it and a lot of unintended consequences involved, and so it's definitely gonna be hand in hand with a lot of these issues. But that's just all I wanted to say, that there's there are a lot of there are a lot of X factors involved in all of these.
All right. So I'm sure Sean has made a note of this concept, and as people raise their hand, they can certainly chime in if they have concerns. But I, as opposed to in favor of, just to save time, because if you don't say anything, then I'm going to assume that we have consensus on at least that, and bringing up the point as a concept. All right. So the next hand I see up is Joe Dweck.
Joanne, thank you. I think what I'm seeing, and as Carl Henry had mentioned, and really what also Elizabeth had said, there's a lot of complexity, and this is a massive, massive thing. And I think it's far, far too large for us to say yay or nay. I think, and in fact, it's far too large for us to even deliberate it. I think it needs a subcommittee, like we had with bylaws, for some people to try to examine it and to try to break down what we should look at. And one of the things I had originally raised my hand, in fact, about the storm drainage issues, which, very frankly, Greg, I don't think there's a zoning law about paving over one's garden. I think there's no law whatsoever about that. It's everybody can do it. A lot of people have done it and made illegal parking spaces there. It's by the thousands upon thousands, and therefore there's thousands of acres of normal water that's not going into the ground anymore. It's now a problem of runoff and puddling. That's just a thing. All the stuff that Elizabeth had mentioned, God bless her as well. We happen to be one of the most efficient cities in the world because of our dense population and the public transportation. There's just so many issues, and I don't want to get into details. I think Carl Henley was right. We need to make a few items that we want to speak about, and those are the things that we're concerned about. I don't think the parking, frankly, is an issue, because I think that it's a matter of entrepreneurship. If they would put up a building where they're going to make a lot more money than electricity, they would have done so. And you could always put the electricity, as you said, Joanne, on top of the building. There's just so many. There's a gazillion things here, that we could speak about. I think it's just too darn big. And I think we need a subcommittee to address it. That's it. Sorry. Bye.
Right. We don't have time for a subcommittee, but we will plan to have more frequent housing and land use meetings with regards to the other text amendments that are coming for our consideration. But for zoning for carbon neutrality, we have this meeting, we have the public hearing, and then we have to submit our comments on the 12th, because that is the day of their meeting. So I want to, Liz, I saw your hand go up. I don't want to debate about anything that's being said.
Can I just clarify something?
I want to move on to other concepts, and then we can circle back. Okay.
Okay.
There's still other things that, because I think we talked about that pretty clearly. Next person is Mehdi Harris.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all the comments. One confusion that I had personally is that the language in most of the text is advisory, and it says we will allow, for example, more permeable space, but it doesn't use prescriptive language that we, for example, we will have some regulation, like Joe said, about impervious surfaces, or, for example, having a percentage of the open space of a lot as permeable surface. So if you don't get to those details, basically the zoning eventually not gonna work. City of Seattle has done that. They have something called green points or scoring system, that if you have more green infrastructure, you get some points, and you collect some points to get permission eventually. So my suggestion is maybe asking to have more prescriptive language around some of those issues, like stormwater management. I've done research on cool roofs. I dropped the link in the chat, that you can see basically all the buildings in the city and whether they are cool roofs or not. But cool roof, I mean reflective roof, or high SRI roofs. And even though there is a local law that new buildings have to have highly reflective material, some buildings don't, and the Department of Building actually is not enforcing all of those. So maybe we can have some language that enforcing some of those regulations that are already in place to support urban heat island mitigation or stormwater management. I think that would be good. Yeah, again, just there is not much to talk about when you don't have the prescriptive language there.
Yeah, I agree that they're quite prescriptive in some areas and not enough in others. So I'm interested in giving that point that in certain parts of this document and the amendments that they do more with more words, particularly in the realm that was brought up here by Mehdi. Do we have a consensus that overarchingly some things are need to be more prescriptive and not be left up to the whims of the developer?
I agree with that, what you said, Joe Dweck.
Okay. All right. All right. I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up and a lot of head nods. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Next is Gregory Alvarez.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make a few big picture observations as well, just to maybe add to the conversation. So, I guess overall, my I guess greatest concern comment was that to me, the way they've structured this does seem a bit overbroad in that they have changed the definition of accessory use or at least modified it. And they've opened up that to basically allow energy production, energy batteries, other heat pumps, all of these things that are going to honestly going to be a part of local law 97 moving forward anyway. But they've sort of constructed this, I think, in a way that just may create those unintended consequences that we're concerned about. Basically opening it up maybe a little too wide into allowing these things in residential districts, in potential districts that may be not able to accommodate them. For instance, allowing as the cutoff 10,000 square feet into the size of these things that can be installed as of right. Basically opens it up so that we don't have that review in the future for these sorts of components. Now, again, I think we're all in agreement that we want to encourage all of these sorts of conversions over to a greener way for our buildings to operate. But maybe there has to be more precision here to allow it. I tried to look up. The question came up before about how do we have these. How do we really consider the safety aspects of these things, particularly batteries that have instances of combusting, and causing fires pretty easily here. So, what's really the safety valve there? And the only thing I could find in terms of the materials they provided, especially in the FAQ, was DOB and FDNY are covering this, and they'll set out, and they'll look after all of this when these are instituted. So there's no way there are going to be issues here because there's going to be oversight. Well, we obviously have concerns there on that front. So just overall, I just I think my comment overall was that it seems like there is more precision that's required here, particularly in instances within our own district where we wouldn't necessarily want to have a 10,000 square foot battery next to us, without some sort of considerations. They've added certain things in terms of screening, but again, is that really sufficient? What about noise considerations? What about other unintended effects on neighbors? So that was just my takeaway, I think, overall in terms of these things, and they're all towards that service, to basically accommodate it, which again, I think we all want to, but the precision may not be there yet to to really just let them fly and see and come as it may. That's my concern, and I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. And again, I think it's a valuable piece to put in our comments and conditions. More precision is required with regards to accessory units, and the things that you talked about, which is in line with, you know, being more prescriptive. So I'm just gonna put it out there that, or do we have a consensus that we would like this document or these amendments to be more precise? And while they're allowing more uses, more accessory, you know, to move towards carbon neutrality, we would like more precision so that the decisions aren't on the people who are actually, you know, making the building or installing the items. Okay. All right. I'm seeing a lot of head nods and thumbs up, consensus on that. While we're talking about that, I'll throw in a few of the things that I had written down. For one thing, and this again has to do with accessory, I have concerns over solar parking canopies for residential lots. I don't really understand why they would be utilized in that way, because a roof solar system would be way more effective, especially, you know, in sort of the Victorian part of the neighborhood, even though it's landmarked. If you think about a community like that that isn't landmarked in our district, you know, there's larger houses, there's a lot of trees, there's items that wouldn't make it as efficient as a roof system. I think one concession could be, and this goes back to precision and prescriptiveness, is to say that if there is an existing legal carport that already had zoning on that property, then that could be utilized as a canopy because it already acts as a canopy. But to create canopies in areas that wouldn't already have a legal carport seems to go against the grain because they're very similar, right? Because that's what this canopy is acting like. Melissa, I saw you throw your hand up while I was talking about that. Did you have something you wanted to add about this?
Well, it was actually going back to the ADUs and having them be, I guess, too restrictive, and just having, at least to me, having language in this that is too restrictive and saying that we want them all to, they must have these specific regulations, they must all look alike, they must be whatever, anything that's too specific like that and that makes them too difficult to pass. It actually goes against what we were talking about earlier about us needing more housing and us needing more. Basically, if we make the restrictions and the specifics too specific in any of this, then it's going to make it too difficult to actually enact in the future. And that's.
Did you see in the text amendment that the ADU requirements are too restrictive?
No, that was, I don't think they are. It's going back to what was just being said about us asking them to make them more restrictive than they already are.
Well, when we say what they redefined accessory, not specifically just accessory dwelling unit. Accessory is energy capture. You know, they've lumped the word accessory into a whole bunch of things, including, you know, a solar canopy. So we can be very specific to say these are the items that we would like them to be more prescriptive on and not identify accessory dwelling units. You certainly don't want to make accessory dwelling units more cumbersome than I imagine the DOB will do anyway. Because no matter what this is, they still have to have their own. It's just, you know, the accessory dwelling unit is going to sit on the lot in a certain way, and that's all this is talking about. The DOB is going to have their own set of, you know, responses to that. But we can be very precise in what we say when we talk about accessory, but they've really broadened what they mean by that word in this document. So going back to solar parking canopies, I would like them to be more prescriptive on that, and more precise. I, again, don't understand the logic of putting it at close to 15 feet above ground level. I know a lot of community boards were against that in terms of neighborhood character and sort of the being crowded in an already crowded city. So do I have, not necessarily do I have a consensus, does anyone disagree with that sentiment that putting solar on a roof is more effective than putting it 15 feet at ground level?
Joanne, just a quick thing. I took a survey. One of these companies wanted to do solar powering of my house, and just for everybody's edification, that it wasn't doable because of the trees around. And I think this might have pertinence to what we're talking about now, that depending on the height of the solar panels, if somebody wants to put it in a carport, they might want to take down a tree or trees, because it's not, the trees are going to give shade and they won't be able to have effectiveness for their solar panels at a lower level. When the higher levels, there's difficulties with this whole concept, obviously. And yes, it needs to be more prescriptive. I hope that doesn't confuse anybody.
I mean, yeah, that's an interesting point. Certainly couldn't take down a street tree, but could remove a tree on their own property, which would negatively affect a lot of the things that we're trying to do, which is, you know, reduce heat, increase shade, so on and so forth. If if Moose's hand and Nina's hand went up to have a discussion about the solar panels at 15 feet versus roof, okay, go ahead.
Actually, this goes to Joe's point. I actually wonder whether it would have the opposite effect. So if I'm looking to, for example, install a solar canopy and it costs X amount of dollars, but then I find out I have to pay to cut down a tree, regardless of whether I like the tree or not. I might love the tree and decide not to do it anyway. But if I realize, okay, I need to spend, let's say, $10,000 to take down a big tree, I may not, it may not math out. And I might say, okay, actually, it's more cost effective for me to throw it on top of my roof. So I feel like the tree consideration cuts both ways, and I'm not sure how we could. I'm just trying to think of what effect a tree might have on that. But I did have a broader question about the point canopy versus roof, which is, do we know? I know a lot of roof solar you can get with zero down, although the math can get a little weird. Do we know if there's a significant cost differential on a solar canopy versus a roof? Because I imagine we would want to incentivize people to do solar wherever they can. And if a canopy ends up being more cost effective, then this would be a great way to get more people to add solar. I'm not sure if anyone has kind of insight into that.
I would have to look into what the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, allows in terms of solar placement and where. Again, devil in the details. Is a canopy going to be covered for a rebate by IRA or not? But
yeah, good point.
I mean, I sort of feel like the efficiency, the cost benefit of efficiency of the placement of the solar panels versus sort of as of right solar canopies in driveways where there was no carport before. I think there, you know, basically the zoning allows, the zoning is less restrictive than you would have found if you had put a carport in. And I think it would be one thing to say if the person wanting to put in the solar canopy had to come before their neighbors and present it, but this is going to be as of right? So we wouldn't have a public hearing for a special permit, so on and so forth. It would just be done. So you sort of, I don't know if efficiency and changing the streetscape have the same cost benefit analysis when the option is to put it on a roof.
Right. It sounds like you're pro. You don't mind if the solar panels go on top of an existing canopy, but if you're going to create a canopy entirely centered around adding these solars, you want to make sure that there's enough community input. Am I understanding correctly?
That's right. Yeah, if it's an existing carport, of course, like the structure is already there. You've already, you know, you've already, it's a legal carport, not something that somebody built, you know, without a permit and so on and so forth. So existing structure, or, you know, if the zoning allowed for a carport, right? Then the zoning should allow for a solar canopy, but it's finding the cross between the two without everyone just going out and putting up a solar canopy in their driveway without community input.
May I have a suggestion here?
Sure.
It sounds like we want clarification on the regulation on two different things. One is if people are putting solar on roofs, that's a separate issue that, you know, there are regulations, Department of Building has regulation on that. But if there is a solar panel on some other structure, like it is on driveway or it is a parking lot, that should have a separate set of regulations. I think that would probably address the concerns that Liz has on parking lots, that would address some of the other concerns that we have on carports. It sounds like we can separate these two issues and have some comments for each of those.
Well, that's what the conversation is about, is, you know, the cart before the horse. You're allowing for, without the Department of Buildings actually saying what would be allowed, right? You're creating the space for it, but then what is the prescription from the Department of Buildings going to look like? So here, what I tried to do, or what we're trying to do, is make suggestions on how it can be moved forward in a way that preserves the streetscape, and is most efficient, right? Because 15 feet off of the ground may not be as efficient as on top of the roof. All right. Celicia, you have your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. So I just wanted to say that I think that overall, there are too many variables when it comes down to something like solar panels. And you kind of have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And I'm kind of guessing that when it gets down to DOB, that they're probably gonna, you know, take it on a case-by-case kind of basis too. And it'll be up to people to interpret whatever the general regulations are. So is it possible to, instead of maybe voting on or getting a consensus on, you know, what height or where it can be located, is it possible at this stage in the process to request more oversight on a local level at the community board? Because that would probably be the sort of better way to go with this, because there's so many variables in a lot of these decisions, or a lot of these processes, especially when it comes down to green technology, sustainable technology. There are just so many things to consider. So is that possible to sort of, because it doesn't seem to me that DCP or DOB will have enough, you know, people power to be able to have the oversight that's necessary for these sort of more focused details of these different situations. So is that something that's possible?
Sean, I think you wanted to respond to that.
I mean, first of all, DCP doesn't have an enforcement branch at all, so it would fall on all of the other agencies to enforce these zoning text amendments should they pass. And then just so that everybody knows, I'm not being exhaustive about it, but I'm trying to put the higher level points into the chat. So if you can glance over from time to time and where I put notes, if I've miscaptured something, let me know. And those aren't going to be the sole comments, but I'm just trying to get the higher levels in there. And so on the point of solar panels, I put that you know, just asking from Joanne's comments, if would the city assist with cost parity? And since the placement efficiency varies across districts depending on, you know, other aspects of the district, land use and tree coverage and stuff, it raises concern about them being as of right everywhere. So the one size fits all model on solar panels might actually not, that communities might want further review, and as of right might not be acceptable globally unless there's more clarity in the proposal.
Right, and that's the biggest problem with many of the items in this text amendment, is that they become as of right, have community input anymore. We could ask, we can say, you know, for residential solar canopies at the height of 15 feet. Well, and I use 15 feet because that's what's in the text amendment, that there be community input, that it not be as of right, but that goes against what they're trying to do here. They're trying to get the process much simpler for it to be done.
Yeah.
So we could ask for community input. I don't think that they'll do it because that's not their goal. So we could ask for the appropriateness to be decided by DOB, but again, that takes away the community, right? It takes away the community input. So I think in as much as we can assert, you know, that again, one size doesn't fit all, which I think is a really great way to say it. One size doesn't fit all. As of right may not work in every community for this particular aspect or that particular aspect, solar canopies or, you know, other items. We could phrase it like that, you know, that this is what you're losing when you make everything as of right and you don't have community input. Sean, you want to say something?
If I could just to frame it. I mean, the other idea here is that, you know, one of the greatest enemies of a good idea is a bad plan. And so to the extent that this plan isn't clear and it's hard to assess whether it's a good plan or a bad plan, I think the way our first letter to DCP was framed as, we have concerns about the process of bringing the zoning text amendment forth, I think the broad frame around all of the comments on the details of the plan are sort of similar. We have concerns about many aspects of this plan, and I don't think we have to be any more prescriptive than they've been by saying where we don't think solar panels should be as of right, assuming that there might be such places. We might think all places are fine, but our question is, would DCP continue to consider areas at a community level where solar panels might not be appropriate as of right, and allow further community review? So they're just questions and suggestions for them to go back and work a little bit harder on drilling down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor. I want us to be a little bit more definitive than, you know, a document of questions. I think some things are worth questioning, and I think some things we have to let them know that, you know, it's not appropriate. Like, you know, in some of our in some of our neighborhoods, one size does not fit all. So I would rather, you know, while I don't like to read, you know, resolutions from other boards that are like no and yes and this, you know, that there, I think we can be equally nuanced by asking questions, but not making it like, oh, you know, because we're really just sort of, we're really under the gun. They're going to get it at 11 o'clock in the morning and they're going to meet at whatever, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I just want to be, you know, as specific as possible because we did all spend a lot of time going through the document. So all points noted about that. And I think the biggest takeaway was we're really missing community input on this item, and this may not be an appropriate use for as of right, if I could sum it up. Does that sound good with everyone for now without being too prescriptive?
But can you just run that by one more time? Thank
That
you.
regards to canopies for residential lots, this may not be the best use of that. One size does not fit all, and that as of right in this situation may not be the best choice.
Got it.
Alrighty. I have two other things. There've been not a lot of discussion, but this is an idea. I'll read it to you. And for context, it's about how some of these retrofits and changes that will be made or additions of accessories like solar panels, how they will be passed off to tenants. So I'll read what I wrote, and this is what I was thinking. This has to do with silos, how DCP and for the state, for example, are siloed. So I wrote, DCP CPC will notify the New York State Department of Housing and Community Renewal via executive summary to the extent of which these zoning text amendments will create an expectation or necessity for retrofitting New York City rent-controlled and stabilized buildings, including accessory mechanical equipment, energy infrastructure equipment, wind turbines, insulation, roof modifications, etc. The intent of delivery of this executive summary to DHCR is to prompt a discussion ahead of DOB local law development and ensure that major capital improvement charges will not be or will be sparingly levied on tenants in conjunction with retrofitting and compliance. So the summary is that there needs to be a conversation between New York City and the state, and when landlords start submitting major capital improvement applications to DHCR, that they're already been thinking about whether or not these are applicable to be put on the tenant at 1/40th of the cost, let's say $1 million, 1/40th of the cost to the tenants in the building. Because New York City is unaffordable as it is. Rents are unaffordable as they are, becoming more unaffordable. And to levy such a capital improvement could push even more people out of their apartments. I'm seeing, Nina, you're putting your hand up in regards to what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, somebody actually sort of put something I think similar to what I'm thinking in the chat. The presumption in investing in things like solar panels and possibly other technologies that is that they lower the cost of electricity and possibly other utilities as well. So I think that raising the question of how that impacts the tenants in terms of rent if the costs of utilities have now gone down, it seems to me that there needs to be some assurance that those decreased costs will then be passed on to the tenants as well.
Right. So
Does that
I'm not only talking about solar though. I'm not only talking about solar, I'm talking
I know.
about 197 and all of the things that have to be done to reduce carbon emissions in the buildings today. In addition, though, this is another discussion for DCHR, is will the landlord have to submit the payments that he gets from his solar panels to them so that tenants get a credit? This is what the conversation is about, right? So
I guess we're saying the same thing. I just wanted to clarify that as a point that you know, because so often when there are improvements, it does get put on the tenant solely or the tenants solely. And, you know, even though the landlords may be getting credits and other kinds of benefits. So.
I have one other point after this one. I think this is a member of the public, Jofrane Lagonde. I'll give you an opportunity to ask a question. Please be brief because we are having a public hearing on this on September 7th.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'll be very brief. My question is just along that Nina said, the rebates and incentives being distributed to the tenants, as well as employment of these developments, are reassuring and making sure that the labor rights are being continued on these new developments that are going to happen, as well as youth credit, youth spaces, like are these being impacted as well? That's another thing where carports are coming up. They're looking for spaces for solar panel ports, but we still can't find, you know, good spaces for large enough community centers. So is this being taken into account? I'm sorry, I haven't been able to fully go through the document and fully understand like how that's gonna also impact that part of the community as well. I haven't heard anything about that, so I was just wondering.
Okay, thank you so much for your comment, and I hope you can join us for the public hearing on the 7th. Yeah, what DCP would say is that this is just zoning text, and then in whatever direction, you know, items would go, but they're all very good points, and we'll take them into consideration as we draft the recommendations to the full board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. And then, so does anyone disagree with adding that to our comments and making sure that the city is talking to the state and that all benefits will benefit the tenants and expenses will be minimum to the tenants when it comes to retrofitting these buildings in whatever manner? I'm not just talking about solar, I'm talking about all the things. Melissa?
No, I definitely do not disagree with that at all. I just wonder if you want to specifically mention the state's clean energy initiative. I mean, it's something that is working on that immediately. I mean, it's HCR and there's tax credits. The state's working with NYSERDA, and it's all of that. It's right there, so you can tap into that.
Yeah, I mean, there absolutely, there needs to be oversight in which these applications are reviewed and how many credits were received, both on the federal and the state level, and so that the full cost of the bill to do these items isn't inflated, even though the check was pocketed by the landlords and the building owners, for sure. So it's all encompassing, just to make sure that we remove the silo and that tenants are protected. Okay. I wanted to bring out, I wanted us to recognize, and I'll read what I wrote. Community Board 14 recognizes the global implications of these zoning text amendments in the quest towards carbon neutrality in New York City and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels through electrification. We risk, very plainly, cleaning up our local environment at possibly the cost of degrading and dirty living conditions and pressuring the human rights of workers around the world that supply the common elements, cobalt and graphite. Now, there's not a lot. There's not a lot to be done because lithium batteries are the means in which we store energy right now. I think there's a lot of articles out there and talking about why we can't come up with cleaner batteries. But while this has no impact on the zoning text amendment, I just wanted us to acknowledge that doing this process could be contributing on a negative effect to another part of the world. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, so it would be said very simply in that way and no other editorializing. And one other thing which I wanted to, they talk very extensively in the zoning text amendment about street trees. I would like us to reiterate the fact that enforcement on street tree planting by developments is nil. I wrote, however, there is zero enforcement in this realm. The C of Os are issued before street trees are planted, or redefined as rain gardens, or relocated due to feasibility wavered by the penalty or fee. There is no incentive for a developer to comply if trees are not planted and the certificate of occupancy is issued anyway. And then I talk about specifically in the north of the district, each new development had created several tree pits, but did not endeavor to plant the required trees. In fact, Councilmember Joseph used funding from her budget to plant 40 street trees, many of which were the original responsibility of the developer. And I cite 2 buildings, 2153 Caton Avenue and 100 Lenox, as examples. So they had multiple tree pits where they were to plant trees. They never planted them. And then Councilmember Joseph, in her out of her own budget, went throughout the neighborhood planting trees in available pits, and thus took the onus off of the developer. So I want to mention that. That was pretty much my last thing. That had one other thing, but I don't want to belabor the point because it's just so in the weeds, this thing. Does anyone have any concerns about just commenting on street trees? Sean? Sean has no hand up. Okay. All right. Anyone else have any epiphanies that they wanted to add to our list of comments? Sean?
Now I do, not on street trees, but I'd be interested in a discussion about energy storage and the language about as of right energy storage in residential areas. It's a point that was raised by a number of boards, and Greg had mentioned FDNY's, would be responsible, the uptick in lithium battery fires. And I know FDNY said at one of the public meetings that they simply don't have any experience fighting a lithium battery fire on a roof. So that is, I wondered what the board thought about energy storage in residential areas, regardless of square foot requirements.
Feel free to raise your hand. Considering the response from FDNY regarding Berry Street, where they were putting lithium energy storage on the roof, and their response was that they didn't know because they never fought a fire like that, was a little concerning. I see Medi's hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. As far as I understand, those fires in the city, they are because of non-standard batteries. There are extensive standards on that, and I know that city is trying to enforce, at least when it comes to city bikes, to enforce some standard batteries. I think that can address most of the concerns. Again, I'm not an expert on that, just reflecting what I heard.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring the focus in on lithium storage alone. It's just all energy storage systems and generation systems of any size allowed in a residential district.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that at least I wasn't projecting on the non-standard batteries that were in people's homes being charged that were not UL listed or tested. I think just in general, I react to the fact that the fire department is sort of nebulous about this because they haven't encountered it, which is a good thing. And I would wish that they could project a little bit better on other experiences, like perhaps with a battery in a standard electric vehicle, and sort of project on those experiences. Corazon, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I was just wondering if those batteries are they mandated to be on the roof, or can those energy capture sources be in the basement? Because that would, or someplace close to the ground.
How is that better?
I mean, is that what you're asking us to comment on, or are you just asking us how big are we okay with on a roof?
I'm not asking about batteries in particular. I'm not asking about roofs in particular. This zoning text amendment says that energy storage and energy generation would be as of right, including in residential areas. There's not, and so other boards have questioned about heat management,
Also, the fact that the fire departments they don't feel equipped to handle the battery explosions, those type of things.
So then I guess, yeah, I don't know how big they need it to in order to power what they're going for, but if they can keep it to as minimum as what's available to make what they need work, instead of, let's just throw a whole bunch of stuff up
or
there.
that would be restrictions and not as of right.
So then I'm for not as of right. If that, I mean, if that's what you're asking me to comment on.
Okay. Well, we have a few other hands up, but let's see what Nina, you're next. Oh, Liz, Denise.
I was just going to note that when I had watched the City of Yes presentation to DCP on this text amendment, they had noted that these batteries are extremely different from the batteries that have been causing fires and are extremely safe in comparison. And I wanted just, note that additionally, the alternative to this is to continue to have less clean energy in various ways. It's not necessarily that this is like some magical bonus that just a battery for something else. It's to try to create cleaner structures of energy and cleaner delivery of energy that throughout the city. It's part of modernizing that system. So I think it's a good idea to continue to allow for that to happen. And I just want to note that these are very, very different batteries than the ones that we've been hearing about fires about. And DCP had answered a lot of questions about that in their presentation. And if people want more information, they can see it there.
I think we're all aware they're very different, and aware, what I think a better approach might be is to approach it as, we were approaching other things. I mean, our knee-jerk reaction is to say that they shouldn't be as of right, because we want to have some say over where they go. But I think that perhaps the concern is that we don't have any assurances that while they're safer, it doesn't make them, does not mean that they don't pose a risk. You could be a very good motorcyclist and take all the training, but there's still a risk. And that's what people feel. So how can we direct this process in a way that we would feel more secure with energy storage on roofs? Whose oversight could that be, and what kind of, I mean, does that require an environmental impact study anytime that this is done, right? So just, I'm just throwing things out there as opposed to saying, okay, yeah, this is as of right, but you'll need to do an environmental impact study, and that would have to include the FDNY. Does that feel, sure, Greg, go ahead.
Well, and the other thing too is that right now the division between as of right and requiring approval is 10,000 square feet, which I don't know, to me sounded a little random, but I don't know how they came up with that number. And it seems to me kind of over inclusive depending on, who's going to be using it. For instance, if you're putting something in a battery in a single family home, I mean, I don't know who would necessarily, but if you did, do you need 10,000 square feet? Probably not. So it's that sort of thing too, where the way they've constructed it, it's kind of strange. And the question of roof and basement and all of that, that hasn't really been worked out yet either. And the other component, I guess the final component is, in terms of battery storage, in theory, definitely we need it, but does it need to be on rooftops, or can it be more designated in centralized areas where you have larger battery storage centers where you can centralize it there, and then energy can be injected into the grid by that means rather than having individualized systems. So to me, that was just some of the questions I had in terms of the specificity.
Yeah. I think that's interesting that a couple of times I read some square footage numbers in this document that they changed, and I was like, that's pretty random. Where did they come up with that number? And then sometimes I was like, oh, 10,000 square feet, maybe, anything greater than that would really require some thought as to where it went and how far it was from somebody else. Maybe there is some science or thought process behind it, but so it is 7:57. We've been out this for an hour and a half. I really want to stop at 8 o'clock. We'll hear from Mehdi, and then we'll come to a consensus on this item, and then we will say goodnight. So Mehdi, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I think all the comments are very thoughtful, and it is natural to think about all these aspects. Wanted to mention that this is generally a positive move from city's side. So the overall should be supportive of this. I understand that we want more details. Everyone wants more details, and that's probably what they are doing. So in terms of the or comments, we should show some, being that we are supportive of these changes. These are all great goals. At the same time, when more details are available, we will be able to offer more insight and feedback. So, I wanted to make sure that we are not hiding the support under all these concerns that we have, those are all legitimate concerns, but wanted to make sure that we are also expressing the support.
Well, I would say conditional approval is providing support, just allowing us to give some conditions, recommendations, and opinions. So, the letter did say conditional approval. So that, I think that's pretty positive. I know the member of the public, Jeffrey, just wanted to add something, and then we'll take consensus and move and close this discussion.
Hi, yes, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that I feel like there needs to be some more research in terms of like what the real benefit is for the city of New York. Us being a city this large, like how much energy really is needed to be stored to really have an impact on being energy efficient. From what I understand about solar energy, solar power and collection of it, Even concerts who have tried to just run on solar power have had issues with power at a concert, at a live concert with thousands of people. So for a city to then want to invest that type of money or even in that type of infrastructure, what real impact or benefit is it going to have for us if those simple concerts and other facilities have tried to use the solar panel direction, but have run into issues as well. So I'm wondering if that's being evaluated, as well as like just our solar consumption, because during the winter months when we don't have as much solar exposure, how does that impact the less energy that's being collected? If at a point that we really need to use it, is it a real benefit for us? So those type of things are the things that I'm thinking about as well. But I will make sure that I'm at the public meeting to ask the companies as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just in short, they found that buildings are the biggest emitters of carbon emission, especially ones that are still using fossil fuel, natural gas, oil. And so they're attempting to get, especially all new buildings that are being built cannot use any of those items. They all have to be 100% electrified. And they're trying to get as many buildings as possible to comply and become electrified so that we reduce the carbon emissions from buildings. So that is their goal. Greg, did you want to close us out?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to raise my hand. So.
Oh, you didn't need to raise your hand. Okay.
No.
All right. No. All right. So I think we did some good work here. Certainly, if you have any lasting comments, just email them to the board office during business hours, and we'll take a look at them. Any additional things we'll bring up at the public hearing. The goal of the public hearing is to hear from the public first and foremost, and then to just solidify what this is going to look like when we bring it to the board. Okay. All right. Again, thanks for meeting on August 21st, our committee of the whole. I wish you a good rest of the summer, and we'll see you on September 7th. All right. Stay cool, my friends. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.